5 water pumps. That's right. Wise guy here, replacing the water pump in my 2005 Lincoln Aviator for the 5th time. Over several years of owning this vehicle, I have the factory books from Ford, and I'm going to demonstrate the step-by-step procedure that's illustrated within this book, and I am certain that I have discovered what the issue is and where it lies, and it's within one of 2 methods shown in this book of engine cooling bleeding procedure. They have one method of doing this with the Radiator Kit Plus and filling and bleeding without the Radiator Kit Plus. I've already filmed and uploaded videos of this procedure without the Radiator Kit Plus, and I filmed it with my phone. I wasn't happy with how it turned out, and the water pump still fails. So I'm going to try to make this an express video showing method 2 of kind of vacuum filling the engine with coolant rather than disconnecting the heater hose and clamping off the rear heater hose and filling coolant in, and then clamping off the front heater hose and filling coolant in, following that bleeding procedure, as that just has not worked for me. This is the 5th time. So we're going to do this step by step. Step number 1 is to drain the cooling system, and we will start with that. So pretty obvious, but I'll demonstrate it anyway. Step 1, we're going to remove the pressure relief cap on the degas bottle, and then we're going to go underneath the vehicle with a suitable container and drain the coolant out of the drain cock. The only thing I would add to that, I'm going to come up by the degas bottle, follow along the upper crossover fill tube to the crossover fill tube plug. And these can be very tight, so last time I was working on it, I put some anti-seize on it, and that might help it drain out a little faster. All right, the coolant is drained. We'll refer back to the book here. And step 2, remove the cooling fan. For additional information, refer to cooling fan clutch in this section. So that's the next page. We'll see that there is some specialty tools that are going to be involved. Have a nice overview of the clutch fan and shroud. Step 1 is going to be to remove the lower fan shroud bolts and the shroud. Okay, I've already removed one. We'll remove number 2. And this lower shroud just kind of hooks in to the upper shroud with that little hook there. Want to be careful not to scrape against this power steering cooler here. You might have to move this power steering hose a bit. So you can see it scraping against the cooler there. That's what I'm trying to avoid. Before I took that off, has its pros and cons. Has some wiggle room to maneuver it out of the way, but there was times when that was in the way. Okay, moving on to step 2 and turning the page, it's going to say, note, the large clutch assembly nut has a right-handed thread and must be rotated counterclockwise to remove it. Remove the fan clutch. Using the specialty tools, remove the fan and clutch as an assembly. Now that sounds confusing to me, but try not to overthink it. Standing in front of the vehicle, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, counterclockwise to remove a right-handed threaded nut sounds normal to me. You can see how much space we have in between the upper fan shroud and the upper crossover fill tube, trying to access those two bolts on top of the water pump pulley. We need a specialty tool to support that pulley so it doesn't spin as we try to loosen that fan clutch nut. And I have since just purchased the specialty tool, since this is my 5th time doing it. It was $22 at AutoZone. I purchased a Ford fan clutch wrench set, 36 millimeter wrench with a large 57 millimeter crow's foot. I own a serpentine belt removal tool that I purchased from Summit Racing, and I feel that makes this job much easier. I take the crow's foot and make a right angle with the serpentine belt removal tool. I bring it on over and slide it over those two bolts on the water pump pulley, resting the handle on the air filter for support. Take the fan clutch wrench and a breaker bar. You can see how much space is here, not much. Okay, have the wrench on. I attach this breaker bar and lefty loosey. Doesn't sound much different to me. See if I can get a good view of this. Man, lighting is difficult. But that's it. Now I can go underneath the vehicle and just simply spin the fan clutch off the water pump pulley. Just to demonstrate now, when I spin the fan, the pulley is not spinning with it and it's starting to unthread. We'll just spin this fan. I can see it unthreading, bracing myself for it to come down. Very close. And that may seem difficult, but let me tell you, it's a lot easier coming off than it is going to be putting this back on. But patience is key. You can see this hose from the power steering cooler being in the way again. That's why in the past I have unbolted these two bolts and loosened that cooler so it had some mobility. But I'm getting by okay with it staying on there. All right, moving forward to the next page, we're going to remove the upper fan shroud. Drain the cooling, disconnect the upper degas bottle to the radiator hose. Okay, so we'll just grab some, I don't know, I'm sure channel locks will work fine. Here's the degas bottle, the upper hose. Okay, just bring this connector down a bit. Probably on there quite well if you haven't removed this in a long time. There it goes. Okay, coming back. Remove the degas bottle bolt. We got two on the top. And there's one more below this upper radiator hose. Disconnect the lower degas bottle hose at the radiator. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to remove the degas bottle and hose. I just need to kind of get out of the way. Remove the cooling fan shroud bolts. Disconnect the upper radiator hose from the radiator. That's what I'm going to do next. I have kind of modified my upper radiator hose with one of these wing nut guys here. Screws into the upper shroud. You can just maneuver this degas bottle out of the way just enough for the shroud to come up. All right, wants us to remove the fan shroud bolts. There's a couple here. Yes, it would be nice to have this degas bottle completely out of the way, but we'll get by here. I kind of like to remove that degas bottle hose at the radiator rather than the degas bottle, because you can see the shroud is just trying to rub up against it, but whatever. Oh, something went flying. I think that was the cap for the coolant system here. Yeah, I felt it was a little unnecessary to remove the entire degas bottle. Going back to the book, we're back to the original plan of action. Step 4, loosen the 4 coolant pump pulley bolts. Now I always take a quick photo of the serpentine belt pattern before I remove it, and I'll overlay a photo of that from the book here. We'll refer back to that. We loosened the 4 coolant pump pulley bolts, and as expected, step 5, remove the accessory drive belt. For additional information, refer to section 30305, so I'll show a photo of that. Okay, we'll grab the serpentine belt removal tool, or you can easily just use a breaker bar for this procedure. And this little attachment that comes with the tool, we'll just set this up vertically here. And I'm just going to take a second to comment as we're approaching the bleeding procedure for the engine coolant that I will never not use the vacuum filling process ever again. I've done this on several vehicles, and every one of them has had issues with air even after following the bleeding procedures. We're going to take some tension off the serpentine belt with the tensioner there. And again, I've already noted the pattern for the serpentine belt. But every vehicle that I've done this on has had issues with degrading of the heating system. I had a friend over here working in my garage, working on his Yukon, and I didn't comment on what he was doing, and he cracked his radiator after changing a water pump and thermostat, and I could have easily gave him a heads up on my experience, and I wish I did. But I've cracked radiators after this procedure just from air being in the lines, even thoroughly following the manufacturer's recommendation on the bleeding process when you're not using the radiator kit plus. Real quick, take a look at our serpentine belt, make sure there's no cracks on it. This is the time to replace that. All right, moving forward to removing the water pump, we'll go back to the instructions here. We removed the accessory drive belt. So I guess I just wanted us to loosen the coolant pump pulley bolts, remove the belt, and then after the belt is removed, remove the coolant pump pulley bolts. Whatever, I did that first. Now we're to the obvious, remove the 4 coolant pump bolts. We'll go to that. Okay, we will change from 10 millimeter to 13 millimeter to remove the water pump. And I may or may not have mentioned back on step 1 of draining the engine coolant that only 80% of the coolant was expected to come out. So I am expecting coolant to come out as I remove the water pump, so I have the appropriate container down below to collect. Okay, so we got the bolts removed. We're expected to have some coolant come out. And we will get the new water pump on and just do the reverse order here. I'm going to take the entire water pump and give it a little dunk and swoosh it around in some coolant for lubrication on that O-ring. And this needs to be placed in evenly, very delicately, with no twisting whatsoever, as that can damage the O-ring. Have thread sealer prepared on the bolts. And when I read only 18 foot-pounds of torque is needed, that is a red flag to me. This cannot be over-tightened and risk cracking the housing of the engine. Okay, we'll just go in a staggered pattern here. See, barely any tightness needed. That's why I have some thread sealer. I don't want those to loosen up over time. All right, now that the water pump is reinstalled, before reassembling the entire serpentine belt and shroud and fan and everything, I have closed the crossover fill tube with the crossover fill tube plug. I reattached the upper radiator hose and the tube to the degas bottle because this is a great time to test the pressure in the system before reassembling everything. So we will go take a look at the Harbor Freight Maddox cooling system test and refill kit. We've used this before with great results. We need to find a neck adapter that fits our degas bottle, and that appears too big, but with a little bit of patience, okay, we're just going to seat that down, turn this clockwise, and that expands the neck adapter. Real quick, some of these instructions are redundant, so I'll skip over a little bit. Set the heater controls on the vehicle to the highest heat position to ensure achieving a vacuum on the entire cooling system. Note, on some vehicles, it may be necessary to turn the ignition on with the engine off to open the heater control valves. I'm going to turn the fans on just for a second, and the rear heat. And I'm going to turn the fans off. And I guess just leave the ignition on with the engine off. Okay, we'll draw a vacuum. Okay, I'm not going to let it top out. Yeah, we're losing air. All right, so naturally the negative pressure did not hold. That's how my luck goes, but this is a prime example and why this tool is called a test and refill kit. I put my ear next to the water pump and I didn't hear any air leaking from that location. And I listened very closely to the upper radiator hose. I got under the vehicle to the lower radiator hose, put my ear by the radiator. I went over by the thermostat, didn't hear anything. I went inside the vehicle to try to listen for the front or rear heater core vents, no noise at all. And I think I did find where the problem lies, and it is at the crossover fill tube, and that doesn't surprise me because this plug has been so tight in the past that I had to put so much force to remove it, and it sounds like this fitting right next to it, if I put my ear right next to it, I can hear a little bit of air leaking out. So I'm going to test this again and try to put my hand around that fitting to see if it holds pressure. Okay, so I'm just trying to make a seal with my glove and put a little pressure. Let's take a look at the reading here on the regulator. And it is holding the suction, so that's a good indication. So I'm going to show the regulator again as I release my hand. Okay, still holding. Let's release. Yeah, it's coming. Now it's starting to come down. Maybe me putting some force on it slowed the leak, but we can see it is definitely dropping now. So that's frustrating, but at the same time, a little bit rewarding that I didn't reassemble everything and find out about this and have to disassemble everything to fix the leak. Well, although I could have accessed this crossover fill tube with everything reattached, but if it was coming from somewhere else, like the water pump, because that O-ring is very difficult to know if we inserted it properly. You know, they can get nicked or just pinched very easily. So that's why it's a good idea to use the test tool. All right, this is the plan of action here. I just grabbed some self-fusing silicone tape. Creates an airtight and watertight seal in seconds. And a hose clamp. Now, to do it right, which I'm not up for doing, just reattaching the heater supply hose, the upper radiator hose, the other upper radiator hose that goes over to the thermostat, and disassembling this whole crossover fill tube, which you probably can't even find. You probably got to special order it from Ford. But since I can just stop that leak with just a little bit of pressure with my hand, I think this is going to do. Okay, and stretch. Going completely around itself. Stretch. All right, about negative 21 inches. It's holding steady. We're holding steady. All right, reverse order. I'm excited to install the water pump pulley. Little thread sealer. Can't hurt anybody. Just support the pulley from spinning. Okay, serpentine belt removal tool on standby. Before torquing down the water pump pulley, we're just going to push a little loop through the tensioner. And feed this guy up over the top, as well as over the bottom. 2 pulleys. Of course, just referencing to the photo I took earlier. Coming up and around the water pump pulley. Let's see if I get better lighting here. And this last guy coming around like so. Just a fun little pattern. Looks pretty good. And we're going to push the excess belt past the tensioner. Again, you can just use a breaker bar here, but this thing works well. And just take a second to give a quick visual. Make sure the belt is not decentered on all these pulleys and risk having to replace that. And once again, just 18 foot-pounds. 10 millimeter on this guy. I'm just going in a crisscross pattern. Just disconnect this upper radiator hose. This time I'm going to detach the degas bottle tube at the radiator rather than at the bottle. And this is why I don't want to remove this degas bottle. I don't want to be down here reattaching the hose that connects to it. But worth mentioning before the shroud goes back in, at the bottom of the degas bottle, there's like a little pin, and it needs to seat right in there to keep it from bouncing around while driving. And another thing worth mentioning is as the upper shroud goes down, there is this clip here, like a track that the bottom of it needs to slide into. And it's on both sides. Okay, so upper shroud, this little thin piece here, that's what needs to slide into that track down on the bottom. See, it just barely wants to rub on this degas bottle. I'd rather deal with that than reattaching the degas bottle hose at the bottom, personally. Okay, so as we line up here, we think we're good to tighten up, but we're going to go down and guide it into that track. This is this track that I'm talking about. I want to do that now rather than later. Same on this side. It's in. Okay, hard to see, but the degas bottle, that pin on the bottom of the tank, sometimes this can be the hardest part of the job. So again, standing in front of the vehicle, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, but as we get underneath the vehicle, we're going to be facing the opposite way, and we need this to tighten, and we are going to be spinning it counterclockwise to tighten. So that's going to feel a little unusual. And the key is you have to use one hand to support this fan, to keep it level, and to push the fan clutch nut into the water pump pulley threads with one hand. It's very difficult. Okay, so remember this track that we wanted the upper shroud to go through? I ended up turning it outside of there because I feel like I need my hand to go inside the electric cooling fan and the shroud to hold pressure on this fan, because your forearm is just too big to hold this level. Yes, yes, yes. As long as you just get it threaded, then you can just spin it the rest of the way. Hopefully we can see that. Such a tight area. So yes, I had to get my hand in between this here to apply pressure against it. Now I have to kind of bend this shroud. Doesn't take much force. Get it back into that track on both sides. This little guy here. There we go. That was way easier. Okay, as we place the forward fan clutch wrench on the fan clutch, and I'm not going to want this vertically, I want to position it this way so I have as much free space for that breaker bar to turn clockwise before it is interfered by hitting something. So I will turn this way to plan ahead, and we'll notice the pulley will spin because that specialty tool is not supporting it. Okay. We're going to take this crow's foot, position it where it supports the pulley, and at a right angle, resting it on the battery cover. I'm not planning on putting too much force on this. And supporting the crow's foot, I'm going to reach over, grab the breaker bar, and the lighting's bad, but I'm cautious of that gap between the two tools, that they don't rub. All right, that is tight enough, but I wanted to position the light a little different so we can see the space between those two tools. And the fan spins in the same direction, it tightens the nut, so it doesn't need to torque down too much. But just to show the little better view, that was the idea, and that is tight enough. Looking at the lower shroud, there's 2 plastic clips on top and 2 on the bottom here that are going to need to rest inside the upper shroud. So this lower hose coming off the degas bottle, we're going to try to push that hose off to the right. Try not to rub the power steering cooler. Rubbing that power steering hose. Okay. Hopefully you can see that up there. See me wiggling around. Insert that in there. This bottom clip, see me wiggling it there. Let it rest. On this side, bottom clip is in. Top clip is in. Okay, now that everything's reassembled, we're going to draw a vacuum. Seems to be about 21 inches. Okay, as it continues to hold its pressure, I'm going to disconnect the airline. And we are just going to go from container to container here. Still holding pressure. Slowly, I'm going to press down on the regulator just slightly. And slightly open the valve. And keeping a close eye on the level of the container. As we don't want to get too dangerously close to the bottom and risk sucking up air. I'll probably play it safe and leave about 1 liter. Okay, getting ready to close the valve. Into the next container. Slowly going to reopen the valve. And we're just going to do the same. I'm just pressing down on the tube here to keep that at the bottom. And closing the valve. Taking a quick look at the pressure, because that, when it gets to 0, we will be full. Definitely filling a lot slower at this point. We're going to cut for a second and come back to it. Okay, as we're approaching 2 inches, I don't know if you can see the level here. Quite full. Getting close to sucking up some air. I think I'm just going to let this ride out from here. I think we're just about full. I don't think there's any air in the system. So it's just topping off here. Almost at 0.